Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Liz Bridgewater, the Director of Outreach at Climate Action Now, and one of many people who worked to bring this action party to you today. We've got a fun icebreaker question for everyone to answer in the chat. Our icebreaker this evening is, where are you joining from? And if you could be any animal, what animal would you be? Alrighty, let's just get that in the chat. Okay, should be seeing that question now. If you're feeling up for it, please share your video so we can all see each other tonight. We will be recording this action party and it will be available publicly online. We will also be sending out the recording tomorrow. If this is your first ever climate action party, let me give you a quick overview. An action party like this is an opportunity to learn about important environmental issues from people who are experts in their fields. In the course of the same hour, we will use the Climate Action Now Action Carousel. The CAN Action Carousel makes it easy to send well-researched, personalized messages to political decision leaders and business leaders. To show you why it's so easy to take action with the CAN Action Carousel, I will share my screen for just a moment. Alrighty, so this is an example action like the ones that you'll have access to tonight. It only takes 3 clicks to take an action. First, you click Do It Now. Then you can choose how you want to contact the decision maker that you're reaching out to. By sharing your address with the carousel, you'll be automatically connected to your federal, state, and sometimes even local officials. Then you just have to hit send, and you've taken action. As you take actions, you're going to earn points. And when you earn enough points, Climate Action Now plants a real tree on your behalf. So far, Climate Action Now has planted over 400,000 trees together. Now let's go over to Kaylee Beam, Director of Content at Climate Action Now, to get you started with taking action tonight. Over to you, Kaylee.
Hello, everyone. Like Liz said, I'm Kaylee Beam, Director of Content at Climate Action Now. Thank you for participating in answering our little icebreaker question. This was a fun one, and we got some great answers. We've got polar bear, pig. Some of you had the same answers. I saw a couple seahorses. Of course, the most simple, a cat, but also the best, right? I love my cat. He's probably sleeping in a sunbeam right now. But I just love it. This is a great way to kick off today and a good segue into all the actions we're going to take to protect beloved wildlife across the country. So I'm going to drop the link to tonight's carousel in the chat, but I'm also going to share a couple other ways you can access tonight's campaign. So let me just share my screen, and you should be seeing that shortly. All right. So as many of you know, this is our goal tracker. On the left side, we have this wonderful little globe, which will fill in and iterate as we take action here tonight. But one thing that's a little different about tonight is what Liz mentioned. The QR code and link on the right side of the screen will take you to an action carousel on the Climate Action Now website rather than the app. An action carousel like the one you're using tonight is available for any organization that wants to scale up their impact. You can get one embedded on your group's website in a matter of minutes. And for those of you who don't have a website, we can host one for you on the Climate Action Now website. All right, so for those of you who want to access the carousel on your computers, feel free to just click that link I dropped in the chat or type in the short link that you see highlighted on my screen. And if you prefer to use your phone or tablet, just point your camera at that QR code box, wait for the little pop-up to appear, and tap on it to get to the carousel. Of course, if you've never used the carousel before, you'll have to put in some basic information to take action, like your name, address, email, and personalized message. And for those of you who already have app accounts but are using the carousel for the first time, don't worry, you will not have to start from scratch. The carousel will recognize your email, so long as it's the same email attached to your Climate Action Now app account, and prompt you to enter a verification code. Once you put that in, it will transfer all your progress from the app to the carousel. And of course, for all of you dedicated Climate Action Now app users who we so appreciate, you can still access tonight's campaign there under Protect Our Wildlife in the Campaigns tab. And just one last thing before I stop talking and we get started. As you may have seen in our advertising materials, we did not plan this action party alone. So I'd now like to hand things over to the wonderful Cornell University students we had the pleasure of working with this semester. They're going to introduce themselves, share about the actions they wrote for this event, and introduce our panelists so we can get things started. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Kaylee. My name is Zizi Hollid, and I'm a senior in environment and sustainability. The actions I wrote focused heavily on watershed and forest management, as well as a couple of wildlife-focused ones. My favorite action is number 28108, which is tell your senators to support the New York, New Jersey Watershed Protection Act because it focuses not only on wildlife health, but also human as well by restoring and safeguarding crucial watersheds.
My name is Mirrodin Feiss, and I'm a junior also in the Environment and Sustainability major. And this year, my focus was on marine policy actions. My action topic focused on marine wildlife, and my favorite action that I made was in support of the Forage Fish Conservation Act because I did research on forage fish in high school.
My name is Rachel, and I'm also a junior studying environment and sustainability. My action topic was focused on protecting ecosystems, and my favorite action was action number 28000 in support of the Pollinator Promotion Act because it helps protect pollinators in New York State whose populations are declining.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lorenzo Blanco, and I'm a junior in the Environment and Sustainability major as well here at Cornell. And the actions that I wrote were primarily focused on drawing attention toward protection of keystone and native species. And the action I'd like to spotlight is action number 28349, which is to encourage amendment of the Land and Water Conservation Fund to specifically allocate funding for indigenous tribes, because indigenous methods of wildlife management should be appropriately recentered in our country's conservation practices.
Now we're each going to introduce one of our speakers for tonight. Dr. Diane Pataki serves as the Chief Scientist and Vice President for Science at National Wildlife Federation. Trained as an ecologist, her work has spanned the impacts of climate change on ecosystems, the role of human and biological processes in air and water resources, and interactions between urbanization, land management, and landscape management and biodiversity.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I am so pleased to be taking action with all of you tonight.
Dr. Elaine Leslie is on the Executive Council for the Coalition to Protect America's National Parks. Dr. Leslie is a former Chief of Biological Resources for the National Park Service. She served in multiple positions during her 25-plus-year tenure with the National Park Service after serving as a wildlife biologist in private industry for nearly 22 years.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Hopefully I can offer some insight from my many years of being a wildlife biologist and a manager for the National Park Service nationwide. So thanks again.
Thank you, Elaine. And Alexcia Best is a senior campaign associate at Oceana, where she works to stop the expansion of offshore drilling. Alexcia completed her undergraduate degree at the University of the West Indies in marine biology and completed her master's degree in fisheries management and conservation at the University of Miami. She has a focus in fishery policies and is also a certified scuba diver.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for including me in this panel. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. And again, hopefully I can add my 2 cents when I can.
Thank you, Alexcia. And finally, we'd like to give a special thank you to our moderator tonight, Dr. Marianne Krasny. Dr. Krasny is a professor in natural resources and the environment here at Cornell, where she directs the Civic Ecology Lab. Dr. Krasny is the volunteer director of food policy for Climate Action Now, and she's the reason why we're here with you tonight. So we'll now transition into our panel discussion, and over to you, Dr. Krasny.
Thank you, Lorenzo. All right, and thank you everybody here tonight and our panelists and our students, and of course our Climate Action Now colleagues. So Diane, or Dr. Pataki, I'm gonna ask you the question first, and I'm gonna take the second question in our list of questions that we had. So the National Wildlife Federation operates at the national scale, but must adapt to very different ecological realities on the ground. And so the question has to do with how do you make policies that are going to work like across all these different ecosystems? And is that even possible? So there's some good examples of policies that do that and some policies that don't do such a good job of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, as you all know, the Endangered Species Act is facing a lot of challenges right now. There's a big effort to undermine the ESA, and the ESA has had great successes with certain species, especially species where over exploitation was the major threat to the species. We've recovered quite a lot of species that were overhunted and overexploited because the ESA has mechanisms to protect species from take. But the ESA is also old. It's 50-year-old, piece of legislation, and it is not tuned to the ecological realities and diversity on the ground. So there's many other types of policy that we need to enact. And what I am hoping, and many people are hoping, is that the situation that we're facing today with massive upheaval and attacks on our basic environmental protections is the next opportunity to design the new legislation, transformative policies. We haven't had transformative environmental policies at the federal level for 50 years. So it's time to design some new policy tools. And I'm really encouraged by all of you being here. And this is something that you all can work on, which is, visionary new policy that can help habitat and species on the ground. What we're doing right now is, in addition to, of course, trying to protect federal legislation and advance new federal legislation, is think about what's happening regionally and in different states across the country. So quite a lot of conservation effort happens at the state and local level. And we have affiliates in every state, and every state has a wildlife agency that is responsible for enacting a state's conservation plan called the State Wildlife Action Plans. And these plans get renewed every 10 years. And most states just renewed their plans in October. And now these plans need to be approved by the Fish and Wildlife Service. But the states need way more funding to enact these plans. So we do a lot of work working with state agencies and our state affiliates to make these plans as relevant as possible and based on really good science. And now states need resources to carry them out. So our number one legislative priority at the federal level is Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which we're hoping will be reintroduced in this Congress. And that legislation would pass more than $1 billion of new funding to states and tribal nations to do local wildlife conservation. And each state and many tribes have their own wildlife action plans that are tuned to individual localities, ecosystems, cultures. So by enacting this piece of legislation at the federal level, we can get those resources that localities need in order to do, the conservation that is appropriate for their state and for their local government. So look for Recovering America's Wildlife Act. We really need to support this bill.
Thank you. I don't know if that's one that if you guys, the students on the call, if that was one of the actions, maybe you can let us know in the chat that you all did. So Alexcia, I'm going to go to you next, and I'm going to take the third question. And it has to do with communication messages. So Oceana, the organization with which you work, has been effective in building broad support for ocean conservation. What messages or narratives have been most successful in helping people, including those far from the coast, care about the future of ocean wildlife?
Yeah, thank you so much, Marianne. And I confirmed with my comms person that this answer was correct. Our main messaging over the past couple of years that has been really effective has been the fact that everybody loves the ocean. Even if you live inland, more than likely you go to a beach on a coast. And if you don't go to a beach on a coast, for example, you go to one of the larger lakes inland, then you have seen pictures about Florida, California, Delaware, Maine. You've seen pictures, videos, documentaries about humpback whales, orcas, dolphins, turtles, and cool migratory fish like tuna and sailfish. There's something in or about the ocean that everyone can admire or is touched by. So people really want to protect things that they care about, and making sure that people know that the oceans are under threat in various ways usually gets people involved. So messaging that highlights the fact that the places that you care about, the places that you visit, the places that you have fond memories of are in danger by various ways, it has been really effective.
Thank you. Thanks you, Alexcia. So now we're going to turn to Elaine, and I'll ask you a question that draws on your many years of experience. And so as somebody with nearly 50 years of experience working in wildlife biology and for the National Park Service, what changes have you observed in U.S. wildlife management and ecosystem resilience? And what implications do these changes have for the future of conservation in the US?
And that's a big loaded question. Yeah, there's been a lot of changes in my time, especially working at the federal level. I found that when I first came in, I worked in private industry for quite some time and then retired from there and then started at the federal level in about 1993. And at that time, and I worked for the National Park Service. At that time, we were very mission oriented, meaning the primary goal of the national parks were to preserve and protect for future generations. Secondary was visitor use. And now we've seen that completely, I think, flip, unfortunately, particularly in this administration. And so we spent a lot of time on the restoration of species. We spent a lot of time on inventory and monitoring, which really is a fundamental need if you're going to protect anything. If you don't know what you have, how can you protect it? So a lot of time and a lot of money on inventory and monitoring, very important, and the restoration of species, but also restoration of habitat. We really did a lot of focus on that. We had what we called exotic plant teams, and they were stationed at different areas across the country, and they go out and sort of target different parks and different species to non-natives and exotics and invasives to eradicate or at least contain. And so we did a lot of that work, but then the funding just trickles off and you end up not doing quite so much of that. And that's kind of where we're at today. And that's an unfortunate thing because I really think between inventory and monitoring and restoration of species and habitat, I mean, that's what is all about resilience right there. I mean, whether you're talking about climate change or fire or whatever the issue is, fragmentation, we really need to start focusing more, get back to some of the basics so that we have the basic information to be able to preserve and protect in perpetuity for future generations. And so that's a big change right now. One that was a positive change, I don't want to just be negative, but the positive change was in about 2015, we really did a big focus on biodiversity and making sure that, I mean, you know, generally the public didn't even know what that meant. I think people are far more educated today, just in a 10-year period of time, about what biodiversity means. So we spent a lot of time on biodiversity in parks, doing bio blitzes. We did almost 200 bio blitzes in 2016 alone. And we did a big focus on invertebrates. Somebody earlier said their studies on pollinators, but we don't spend enough time and enough money on knowing what invertebrates are out there. We only know such a small portion and whether they're pollinators or not. But that's an area that really needs to have funding and focus, whether you're state or federal or community. And so I see that as a shift, looking at biodiversity, ecological health as a whole, looking more at the landscape level. That's where we need to start focusing and move forward.
Well, thank you, Elaine.
And sorry to cut in, but we have surpassed our initial goal by almost 150 actions. So great job, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and bump that number up. I'm thinking 650. So keep taking action and get us there. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. And great job taking the actions. So I'm going to go to Alexcia for the first answer to this question. And the question is, conservation depends on long-term ecological processes, but climate change is unfolding faster than many species can adapt. What strategies give us the best chance of buying critical time for ecosystems under rapid warming?
Thank you so much, Marianne. I think that at the end of the day, the best thing we can do is phase out fossil fuels. We can conserve species in captivity and protect specific areas, but a just transition is really the most effective way to protect our wildlife. And while federally, unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of momentum right now, as Elaine was saying, states have a lot of power and they can do a lot to start expanding the renewables needed to get local grids onto different power sources and to get us on the path so that in the future, we can have some more federal sources and federal involvement.
Mhm. Just as a follow-up, since I know you spent time in the Caribbean and in Florida, do you have any comment on the coral restoration efforts, coral reef restoration efforts? Because I read quite a bit about that.
I unfortunately am a bit out of touch with the coral reef efforts, but from what I've heard, I know that well, actually, let me not comment. I'm a bit out of touch. I'm sorry. I can get back to you on that.
No, that's okay. Maybe somebody else has any experience if you do, but otherwise, why don't we go to you, Diane, with the same question? Do you have anything to add on conservation depends on long-term ecological processes but how do you deal with climate change given that context?
Definitely decarbonize and get rid of fossil fuels. I'm totally with Alexcia on that. And we're in kind of a unusual situation with clean energy because sometimes clean energy projects are blocked because there are concerns about wildlife. So I want to talk about that really explicitly. That's an issue we've spent a lot of time on lately. The clean energy transition is happening, and the federal government's not going to be able to stop it. It does need to go a lot faster, though. But we do need places to put clean energy facilities and clean energy sites. So right now, in a lot of places around the country, big clean energy projects are halted, and they're not just halted because the federal government has pulled back the funding. They're halted because there's local opposition. So there's a lot of great science about how to do siting and design and mitigation of clean energy sites, big solar arrays, big wind arrays. And, solar and wind is now under attack. There's all this misinformation about how solar and wind impacts wildlife, and there can be negative impacts, but we have the science to do this right. So when you see a big project that's being planned in your area, get the facts. And get involved in the decision-making process because local communities have to be engaged in these decisions. And and my organization and many organizations can get you the right information so that what should I be looking for? Is this project in the right place? Is it being designed so that wildlife can migrate through this facility? Is it in the wrong place in terms of, the migratory pathway for birds? Are they taking restoration methods into consideration? Some solar energy projects are really trying to bring back pollinators by revegetating with native species. There's just a lot of great science and innovation happening in this space. So this should become a win-win. We should be able to have clean energy and biodiversity and wildlife. But right now, sometimes we're kind of fighting each other. Folks who are, on the clean energy side or the wildlife side, like we all have to be on the same team and working towards the same vision for a future in which people thrive, we have clean energy, we are not, we are no longer emitting greenhouse gases, and we have thriving habitat. Like that future is very, very possible.
So Diane, I just have a little follow-up because when I was reading your biography, I saw that you've done a lot of work in cities, so urban areas, and which makes me, given the vision you and Alexcia just laid out, I know there's a role for urban residents, but how about urban parks and sort of small patches of green? Is there a role for them also?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I could talk for this whole time period just about the vision for urban areas and cities as, becoming players in this future. So, of course, we have to decarbonize cities and we've got to maximize rooftop solar. We are so far from maximizing the potential for rooftop solar. Now, rooftop solar can't provide all the energy that we need, but it can provide quite a bit, maybe almost half of our current electrical demand. So there's a lot of work to do with our local governments. A lot of those codes, a lot of those projects are controlled by, municipal government and the city council, so we can intersect with those governments. But there's so much more potential as well to bring biodiversity back to cities. And, often I think the old model in conservation was kind of writing off cities as being lands that, were so degraded that urban development destroyed habitat, which is true in some cases. And yet we have methods of doing restoration now in urban areas that work. So, think about a future in which cities are really, really green, and maybe they're green in novel ways. Maybe there's green walls, maybe there's vegetation on the canopy, or balconies that supports pollinators and bird species. Like, we're just scratching the surface of how to build cities in ways that support other species besides just people. So I'm super excited about that. And if you just do a little bit of Googling, you'll find all kinds of architects and designers who have incredible visions for what cities could look like in the future, like very different than what we have now. So I think it's one of our more like exciting and hopeful horizons in conservation is the future of cities.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to follow up, but and maybe if you get a chance, just if there's any, because I know Singapore is doing some great things, but I don't know if there's cities in the US that are doing things. So maybe if you get a chance to sort of point us to some Google sites or whatever, where there's some cool things happening in the US that we might look to support. That'd be great. So Elaine, and I'll just ask you the same question, which is really, how do we think about wildlife and habitat restoration and conservation in light of climate change?
Yeah, and I certainly agree with what previous folks have said as far as what we need to do to take action on fossil fuels and clean energy and all of that. But I also think we need to look at a landscape level about what we're doing. And I'm not just talking about the West, I'm talking about the entire country. We're one country that does not have a conservation plan. We don't have a national conservation plan. We have all these initiatives, America the Beautiful, 30 by 30, we have all these things going on, but we don't have a cohesive national conservation plan. That's both terrestrial and marine. And I think in order to preserve, protect, restore, making sure that we have species and habitat, we need to look at this at a larger scale. And like I said, not just federal, not just state, not just community. We need to bind all of these actions together, just like the state action plans, and really make sure that what we're doing has intended goals and milestones that we can measure accomplishments. And it needs to be the long term. It needs to be a 20, 30 year, let's get this right, let's get it down. Let's make sure we have corridors, so that our species are migrating, that we continue to have genetic diversity. And that's so important right now as climate is changing, the habitats are changing, animals are getting cut off from ancient pathways, whether in the ocean or on the land. And if we don't do something to preserve these in perpetuity from fragmentation and development, we're not going to have migratory species. We're going to have bottlenecks. And you're going to start to see that, I think, relatively soon because of climate change. We got to start thinking that natural is very much connected to cultural, right? We have people who settled in places because of the natural world. And right now we're trying to divide so much out there. We've divided natural and cultural. We have DEI, issues out there. I mean, the National Park Service worked for the last 20 years to really have diversity and inclusion, and especially with tribes, and look at co-management and how to bring in traditional ecological knowledge. It's so important. I think somebody mentioned that before, maybe it was Lorenzo. And, if we don't be inclusive and we don't gather from all of this knowledge and all of our youth out there, make sure they're well on their way to taking over from old folks like me, we really have to get there, and we really have to have something cohesive. And I think it would be shame on our generation if we don't have a national conservation plan. Like I said, we're one of the few countries that doesn't. So I think we need to start looking bigger. It's great. We're doing things like urban parks and looking at biodiversity and patches. All of those things are very necessary. But we need to look at what are those new parks or monuments or wildlife refuges, those big pieces and chunks where we can actually have whole ecosystems thrive the way they should. Yellowstone, for as big as Yellowstone is, it's not big enough. You know, we can't even let bison migrate out of Yellowstone without being shot. You know, so we have to do something different in this country if we care about our national legacies when it comes to cultural and natural resources.
Thank you, Elaine.
And I'm just going to cut in again really quick to celebrate that we met our goal again. Great work, everybody, keeping that goal tracker ticking up. I'm going to adjust our goal one more time, and then I probably won't interrupt again, but you'll hear from me at the end of the event to report on our progress. Great work, everybody.
So we're at 703 right now, actions. So that have just been taken at this call, in this call, Kaylee?
Yes, that have just been taken in this call.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay,
And
great.
before this
Keep up the good
call-
work.
Before this call, I think we had 500, so I reset the counter to 0, and now we've got another
okay.
700 already. So yeah, everyone's doing a great job and sending those messages. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question says or reads, public attention tends to focus on charismatic species. How does this moral hierarchy of wildlife shape policy funding and public support? And how can we reframe the conversation to elevate the lesser known species that maintain biodiversity? So I think we'll start with you, Diane, and then go to Alexcia, and then go to Elaine.
Yeah, this is another big one, the charismatic species. Here's the thing. So I know you all care about biodiversity in many, many different species. And we heard about the importance of invertebrates, and actually most of the threatened and endangered species and species of conservation need are invertebrates. And these species are critically important. And I know you all know that, but do you really click on the invertebrates when you have the opportunity to click on a whole bunch of different species? Because we have the data, right? So, our team is out, we're sending social media posts and mailings and requests for donations to millions of people all over the country. And the same species get the clicks. That's the thing, right? And it kind of surprised me when I first got to the National Wildlife Federation. I used to try and diversify our communications a little bit, like, hey, can we maybe display this other species instead of the same, kind of dozen over and over again? But I was told that those are the ones that people respond to. They respond to certain species, right? And I think we probably do this inadvertently. I think maybe I do it without even thinking about it. So we really have to make extra effort to get people excited and get them on board with taxa like freshwater mussels, which are, incredibly endangered in aquatic ecosystems. And so there are things like Hug a Mussel Day and, various outreach methods to try and get people excited about these species. But it'd be interesting to hear, everybody's thoughts about what people might respond to, because these species are, the foundation of ecosystems, and, ecosystems are going to collapse. They're simply not going to function. We're going to lose basic ecological function without these species. And so we do have to get people to care about species that are very, very small, or they don't look like us. They're not mammals. So I think this is a critical issue. It definitely influences actual conservation on the ground, because people's political support and their donations and their votes influence which conservation programs actually get funded. And so, it was a big struggle to get states to fund non-game conservation. And now it's an even bigger struggle to get programs. Some states their wildlife agencies don't even have jurisdiction over invertebrate conservation or plant conservation. So the public support is key in making those things happen. So definitely hug a mussel on Hug a Mussel Day, and take part in actions on behalf of those species, because it definitely counts.
Just as a follow-up question, Diane. So given all the kind of alarming news about bird population declines, and of course I'm at Cornell, so we see it coming out of the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. Do you have a comment about birds as you know, you talked about invertebrate, but also birds. Some of them may already be charismatic species, but a lot of them aren't. And then I think, oh, well, possibly I have not read a lot about the bird declines, but could be related to declines in invertebrate populations also. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about bird declines and related issues.
Yeah, definitely. For bird species that are insectivores, well, the huge declines in insect populations are going to threaten those species. And so it's all related. And that is definitely those ecological relationships that we need to make people more aware of. I mean, in my experience, birds are some of the taxa that have the most support because bird watching as a hobby brings a lot of people into conservation. And so maybe we can utilize the fact that there are a lot of bird watchers out there to say, those birds need insects. Those birds depend on other species. Those birds depend on plant species that are really in trouble, especially with climate change. So taking an ecological approach to awareness of biodiversity.
Thank you. All right, Alexcia. The question is about charismatic species and how that ties into your work and gaining public support.
Yeah, I think similar to what Dr. Pataki was getting to, it's about the storytelling, I think. The species that I think have the most public support and shape policy and funding are the ones like humpback whales and orcas, because they give this image that we're all familiar with. You think humpback whale, you think of them saving people or animals from sharks. You think orcas, you think Free Willy, or for all their horrors, places like SeaWorld, where you can go and interact or at least see an orca up close. Meanwhile, you have species like sharks that have been vilified for the past 50 years because of a movie, and they're like they're some of the most important species in the ocean. They shape their habitat, they keep populations in check. So I think publicity and is always the real problem. And so I think the best way to elevate those lesser known species is to work with the documentary teams. And I mean, for all its faults, social media does have real power. Working with ecological influencers, I guess I could say, to get them to tell different stories, to get them to go out and be like, hey, have you seen this bug? This is a really cool bug. You should learn about this bug. And just like increasing the visibility. Understanding that, of course, there are organizations that work really hard at this. National Wildlife Federation, Oceana, we work to protect the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. There are like, I think 300 of them or less out in the wild. And we work really hard. We elevate their stories. We push them on social media, and support comes and goes depending. But yeah, I think making sure that the people who are being heard, whatever metrics you desire, are the ones that are speaking about the organisms that we want to protect. So as Lorenzo and other people have commented, pollinators have been getting a lot of good publicity over the last couple of years, as we're seeing crop shortages and climate change taking an impact on our food supplies. Pollinators are getting more and more time in the limelight. Hopefully that will then transition to birds and transition to small carnivores like foxes and stuff that get kind of pushed out of the way and kind of vilified. So yeah, increasing the good publicity for more animals than just the cute ones.
Thank you. And I know if you're working with children or at a very young age, I mean, they are oftentimes like the only wildlife they might see is like an earthworm or something like that if they're living in it, but they're totally fascinated with earthworms. So there may be some communication or education strategies utilizing that sort of fascination with any bug that they happen to see when they step outside. So Elaine, do you have anything to add about this issue?
I worked on California condor restoration for many, many years. Now there's a face only a mother could love, but they are widely renowned now. I mean, people recognize a condor when before they were like, who would touch that thing, that vulture? And now it's like they're very near and dear and have quite the following. But I think it's truly all about education. Alexcia has talked about storytelling. I think you really need to hit youth hard. And that's what we did during the anniversary of the National Park Service in 2016. We got every fourth grader to be able to get into a park for free, them and their families. We brought from fourth grade all the way through college to do these bio blitzes, and teamed up youngsters with college age kids and other scientists. We found new species to science. We found new species to states, new species to parks. We got kids, everybody practically now has an iPhone, to use iNaturalist. I mean, take a really good picture of a bug and somebody will tell you exactly what it is, you know, and it might be in their hallway, or it might be in their garden or in their garden box out on their balcony, but they did it all. And we had so many youth ambassadors across this country who, it wasn't about grizzly bears, it wasn't about wolves, it was about all of these invertebrates and then also certainly bats and birds, and connecting the dots. And if we don't connect the dots at an early age, there aren't going to be dots to connect anymore. So I really truly believe in getting the youth involved early in education programs and getting them outside. And like I said, I mean, there's people who live in inner cities, and Diane talked about this, but having a garden box on your balcony, I mean, it's amazing, the bees or the hummingbirds that'll come to it. And how do you get people more involved? And I think that's a challenge, but it's a critical challenge, because like I said, I mean, some of us aren't going to be here forever to keep pushing these messages out, and we need to do that, and we need to connect better with the schools at every age level.
Thank you, Elaine. I just wanted to remind people that if you have questions for the panel, you can put them in the chat, and we'll get to them in the last few minutes. But in the meantime, I do have another question or two for the panel. So Elaine, we'll let you start this time. If you could design the American wildlife protection system for a climate change world, including policies, funding, science, and partnerships, what structural changes would make the biggest difference over the next decade? You're muted.
Yeah, hate when that happens. I really do believe that a lot of our policies do need some revamping and updating. I think some folks talked about that before. I mean, there's some pretty devastating things that are about to happen to the Endangered Species Act. So we don't need to go that far. I think what we just need to do is make sure that we have flexibility and adaptability in some of our laws and policies so that they can sustain into the future, instead of having one administration after another revamp them every 4 years, and then you just turn the clock back and, you know, 1 step forward, 3 steps backwards. So we need to figure out how to do this better and make it a bipartisan issue. Do we all agree that we need the Marine Mammal Protection Act? Do we all agree that the ESA and Mammal Protection Act have done wondrous things for our world? I think that's a pretty bipartisan issue. It's how we go about these things that needs far more discussion. And if we don't come together and have those discussions, we're going to lose everything. And we don't want to do that. So I think, especially in times of climate change, when you're seeing, you know, let's look at Cape Hatteras National Seashore, houses falling into the ocean, erosion. Well, it's not just people losing their houses and then rebuilding when they shouldn't rebuild. What kind of policies do we have regarding that? But it's the sea turtles losing nesting habitat, colonial nesting birds losing habitat. So all these things have compound effects, and it's not just one thing. It's not just climate change. It's fragmentation. It's losing habitat. It's invasive and exotic species. Look at the Everglades. You know, you've got rising sea levels, You've got horrific invasive exotic species, boa
Mhm.
constrictors, tegu lizards. The very reason that park was created was because of bird life. Those birds are being decimated left and right by those exotic herpetofauna. So how do we have better laws about transport of exotics and invasives and where, you know, where we address those things in a stronger manner? I mean, Cornell is really good at human dimensions. And we have used human dimensions to try, and I know you guys love your cats, to try to get people to keep their cat indoors. And because that's what's decimating, for the most part, a huge part of the bird population. That's why there are declines, because of things like rats and cats, etc. But it's really very hard. So we need to really incorporate good human dimension issues and dialogue into policy making and law making.
Thank you, Elaine. Well said. Alexcia, do you want to take this question? It's about redesigning the American wildlife protection system for a climate change world, and you can talk about policies, funding, science, and partnerships, and sort of the larger structural changes that will make a difference.
Yeah. I think that's one of the important things that we should be highlighting as we move forward, is increasing the funding and partnerships with Indigenous communities. As Lorenzo said, that will inform a major shift in our perspective and the policies that are put forward. I know that California has already started working with tribes to support cultural burning and forest management, and thus increasing wildfire resilience. And of course, after the devastating fires earlier this year, that will produce like extreme results in the next few years. And then in Canada, I recently learned that 21 indigenous communities, government authorities, and private donors are investing $375 million in indigenous-led conservation to support the extensive forests, freshwater sources, and Arctic wildlife in the Northwestern Territories. And these are, of course, Indigenous people who have worked with their environment for generations. So they are the best stewards to ensure the health of the ecosystem, which of course will inform human health. Once we start seeing the returns from the investments that are already happening, I hope that will continue to inform more policies that are put forward by states and federal governments. And of course, the next step would be incorporating more Indigenous people into public office, and of course in conservation spaces, but of course throughout the government, as their interconnected mindset will help shape other policies and hopefully lead to a more informed and better connected world.
Thank you, Alexcia. Diane, I'm going to throw the question to you.
I think my answer.
Just a minute. We passed the 1,000 mark on the actions taken on the letters.
I said I wouldn't
thanks,
interrupt again, but I'm glad you brought that up, Marianne. Great work, everyone. That's amazing. Let's just see how high we can get it in the last 12 minutes, but more than 1,000 actions is incredible.
Well, that's
Kayla,
very
you're
relevant.
kind of fading out and in.
Oh, did my internet get a little funny for a second?
Yeah, I don't think you have a good connection.
Sorry about that. But basically,
so we'll
everybody
move on
just
to Diane, but maybe if you want to add something more after Diane, we can do that. Or is this my internet?
I think it might actually be your internet.
I think it's your internet, Marianne.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think it's my internet. If somebody wants to take over with moderating, go ahead. But
I think Diane, you were about to start answering that question, right?
Sure. Well, you know what? I was actually going to talk about protecting democracy, which is actually perfect, given that you all have reached more than 1,000 actions here. Because I think a year ago, I would have given a different answer. I would have talked about wildlife protections needing to be more habitat-based and not just species by species protection. And also the National Biodiversity Strategy or the National Conservation Strategy that Elaine talked about. Those are like, we need some much larger visions and some more coordination around wildlife protection. But given everything that's happened in the last few months, I think the number one priority for me to think about in terms of redesigning our American system of wildlife protection is protecting democracy. We can't do any of this without democracy. And now our, fundamental democratic system is at stake. So that's got to be part of it. We've got to make sure we've got strong civic engagement. We have a strong democratic system. We have to empower local communities and tribes, as Alicia said. And right now, it's all happening locally, right? So much work is now local with communities stepping up and saying, if the federal government is not going to support us, then we're going to make things happen. And we're going to have to totally rebuild and revitalize science. Like our whole infrastructure for doing science is being dismantled at a very, very fundamental level. The funding, the data sets, the misinformation, that the stripping of scientific information from the federal websites, that was information that you paid for, right? Taxpayers put investment into collecting data and putting great information on the internet about climate change, about DEI and environmental justice. And now all of that's being dismantled. And our number one priority is going to have to be to rebuild it, but we don't have to build it back in the same way, because a lot of the science for wildlife protections was kind of distributed all across federal agencies. It wasn't well coordinated. We could do better. We have a National Science Foundation, but it didn't really do conservation science, and the agencies that did conservation didn't have any money really to fund all the science that was needed. So we need to rebuild all of this, and we can now think about, building from the ground up a system that will really support conservation from the basic science all the way to the policy and the implementation.
Thank you so much, Diane, for bringing that perspective in. And I know that's something that so many people in the climate movement have been thinking about even more than usual, is the need to protect democracy and how that really underpins everything that we rely on in the US climate movement to keep our progress moving forward. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. We'll be turning over to Brett Walter in a few minutes, but before we wrap up our panel discussion, there's a question that I think would be really interesting for the full panel to address, which is, if there was one thing that you could have every person on this call take to a family or friend member as a lesson that they could share about wildlife conservation as it relates to climate change, what would be one thing that you would have everyone take away from this call? Elaine, would you like to hop in on that first?
Sure. I guess what I would say, and I say this to people all the time, it's like you love this country. If you love wildlife, you must want to protect and preserve our nation's natural legacy, national natural legacy. How do we do that? How can you do that? And just a couple actions in your life can change, not too impactful, but can contribute to making sure that the next generation, that my kids and my grandkids get to go see what I see, that they get to go see a condor flying over Grand Canyon, or a grizzly bear and a wolf interacting at Yellowstone, or go snorkeling with vaquitas. No, don't go snorkeling with vaquitas. But off the coast, go to the Keys, see what's happening with coral restoration down there. Unfortunately, funding is getting pulled and scientists are getting pulled. So, and then also, if you love our nation's wildlife, if you love this nation, and democracy is a great message to get out there, think about going into this field. As you're a young adult, go into the world of conservation. You can make a huge difference that way.
Thank you so much for that perspective. And I think we've been hearing some great threads throughout this call about the different ways that people in different generations can relate to this work, that tapping into that childhood wonder and thinking about what it means to leave a national legacy. All of these things can interconnect with grandparents and parents thinking intentionally about what their kids are getting exposed to. And then I think kids are often able to really bring in this sense of wonder and help adults remember that sense of wonder as well when we think about engaging with our natural environments. Diane, do you have any thoughts you'd like to contribute to that closing question for the panel?
I mean, the message I always want people to take home is that these problems are absolutely solvable. Both the biodiversity crisis and climate change are completely solvable, and there are really bad actors out there trying to convince people that they're not. When the solutions are here, okay, so we know where we can get clean energy and we know how to do conservation. And you've heard a theme in my comments that we're just really resource limited. Like we don't have the actual funding to do it. That doesn't mean we don't know how to do it. So, there's this prevailing feeling that the future is hopeless, or that, these problems either can't be solved or just won't be solved, that society won't have the will to solve them, but you all have the will to solve them. And I mean, I talk to hundreds of people, and we have millions of members at our organization. Millions and millions of people want to solve this problem. So I think it's really about people actually believing that it's possible, and that we're really close. We're actually quite close to being able to do this, and we were on a good trajectory before, and we can be on a faster trajectory if we just get more people on board. So just let everybody know we are going to solve this, right? If they join this movement, we will solve these crises.
I think that sense of hope is absolutely critical for keeping yourself motivated and keeping other people motivated. And I'm always amazed as I look through all of the actions and solutions that our wonderful volunteers bring into the Climate Action Now ecosystem, to just see the diversity of solutions that are on the table. And the real trick is just getting those things implemented, which that sense of hope is so critical for. Alexcia, would you like to close us out on our panel discussion with some final thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna agree with Diane. The hopelessness really tries to take hold. I mean, I find myself losing a day or two to it, and then I remind myself, no, I'm in this work. We're in this work. We want a better world. We want to be able to breathe and go to the ocean and see wolves. I really want to see a wolf in the wild. See all the animals that we dream of seeing in the wild, running around, doing their things. Um, so just remembering that the bad actors, even though they have a lot of money, we outnumber them. We outnumber them in numbers, in strength, in resilience. So just to keep the hope, take action when you can, as we can see 1,050 actions taken just within this hour. Insane. There's a comment period happening for the 5-year plan against offshore drilling. So go onto the Federal Register, look for that. And yeah, just keep pushing. Tell your friends and family that 1 degree less is 1 degree of importance. It might seem like we're too far gone. And I mean, people have been saying that we've crossed the threshold for like 2 years now. A foot across the threshold is better than 5 feet across the threshold. Any bit of action that we can take now to reduce is better than anything that we wouldn't have done. So yeah, keep the faith.
Thank you so much for closing us out with that positive framing. I couldn't agree more. And I think everything we do at Climate Action Now just tries to make it as easy as possible to take those actions. And I see Brett has popped up on the screen now. He's our founder and CEO of Climate Action Now. So I'll turn it over to him now for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Thank you, panel, and thank you, everybody who is here with us tonight. I'd like to go back to Diane's plea for work to preserve our democracy and our climate. And guess what? The solution to both problems is you. It is your, the way we protect our democracy, the way we protect our climate is we speak up. We use our opinion. The fossil fuel industry, public opinion is the only effective counterweight to the immense power of the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry knows that, which is why it spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year trying to shape public opinion with disinformation. Even dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping know this, which is why they go to so much trouble to control the state media. Public opinion is immensely powerful. Your opinion is your superpower. What you saw tonight, in addition to learning a lot, are some of you using the CAN action carousel to express your opinion. You sent over 1,000 messages to political and business leaders demanding action on this. This is your superpower. The carousel is how you amplify your voice. It is so easy to do. In 5 minutes, you can send 20 or 30 messages to elected officials. And guess what? As the Cornell students know, those messages are received and read, and they are tallied for the legislators, right? This is a numbers game, folks. The way we win is we convince our legislators that we really do care about these issues and they want to get reelected, right? So they are going to listen. Now, this CAN action carousel is a big innovation for the climate movement and the democracy movement because it can be embedded on any website in minutes with just 10 lines of code. And I invite Elaine and Diane and Alexcia and other organizations, any organizations any of you belong to, get an action carousel. We'll work with you. We can tailor the actions to your agenda. It is totally free. It's completely user supported. Liz is putting in the chat now a link to a sign up form where you can sign up to get an action carousel, for your own organization. We've never had anything like this, folks. And according to the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications, even though 28% of Americans are alarmed about climate change, I mean, they believe it is dangerous, they believe it is real, they believe it will impact them personally, most of them do absolutely nothing about it. And Yale asked why, and the answer was nobody asked them to, and more importantly, nobody has made it easy for them to do. We now have a tool that makes it very easy for alarmed citizens to raise their voices in mass, and this is how we win. This is how we win. We get this carousel out on thousands of websites. We get tens of millions of Americans advocating for a just, sustainable, and healthy planet. So please, spread the word about the carousel. Tell every organization that you belong to. They don't have to have a website. We're hosting a church congregation website for them. We're hosting Third Act Oregon's, action carousel for them on our website. But if they have a website, that's great. Facebook groups within Rotary Club. There are thousands of organizations out there of concerned citizens who will act if we make it easy for them to do it, easy and rewarding. So please spread the word. You guys are great. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Panel, I'd love to debrief with you in the panel breakout room. And for the rest of you, have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon and your evening with us. And stay tuned to the Climate Action newsletter for more actions and more action parties to come. Thank you, everybody.